This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details. The Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection has taken some flack since its initial reveal due to its perception as simple ports. While referring to these simply as ports is perhaps a simplification of the work that had to go into them, the sentiment is easily understood. Many were hoping for a full-on remake of Super Mario 64 in particular that would bring it up to the level of Super Mario Odyssey. But as I saw those opinions and played the Switch version for our review, I couldn't help but be distinctly against that idea, and I didn't know why. All I knew was that Super Mario 64 looks fantastic on Switch, and then it clicked. Super Mario 64 on Switch has absolutely received a remaster, but one so respectful to the original's artistic intent that many of us never noticed. I'm John Reardon, you're watching NWR TV. Join me to take a look at the brilliance of Super Mario 64's subtle remaster. When you look at Mario 64 in a modern context, you'll notice it's blocky, simple. Its worlds are clean, with bright contrasting colors. Even at its original 320 by 240 resolution, Super Mario 64 is incredibly easy to read. We often see its visuals today as a limitation of the time, but in reality, they weren't. Just compare it to other Nintendo 64 games. You don't often see bright, flat polygons quite like Mario 64. Even more cartoon-inspired games generally supported much more detail than Mario 64. Super Mario 64's presentation was an intentional artistic choice. They wanted it to look that way. It wasn't that they wanted a game that looked like Super Mario Odyssey and this was as close as they could get at the time. They intentionally made it simple. What's fascinating is that I'd argue this actually allowed Super Mario 64's visuals to age better than most of the other games I'd compare it to. It wasn't trying to look a certain way and falling short, it looked exactly how it intended to look. When Grezzo remastered The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, they looked at the game's concept art and tried to determine how the developers had intended it to look. They did the same for Majora's Mask. But have you ever seen Super Mario 64's concept art? No, not the promotional 3D renders. Those were produced as marketing material based on the game. The actual concept art for Mario 64 looks like this. They're less about conveying a visual identity for the game and more about gameplay. Super Mario 64's art style was similarly designed to serve the gameplay. 3D was new, confusing, and scary. Super Mario 64's simple, clean design was easy to understand. Mario and enemies all stood out, and the environments didn't get muddy, as was common in so many N64 games. That being said, it wasn't completely utilitarian either. Much like early pre-rendered 3D images, there is something magical about the uncertainty of this new medium. Let me give you some examples. The strange movement of the ship in The Last Starfighter. The not quite right realism of Myst. This same beauty applies to Super Mario 64. There is an awe to those early low-poly worlds. The stages, like a diorama, represent the world in its simplest form. They float in an otherworldly way among what may be clouds or an ocean. It's sometimes hard to tell. Super Mario 64 is abstract, as so many of Nintendo's prior 3D games had been. Were you to remaster Star Fox or Stunt Race FX, would you want it to look like a modern game? Or would doing that be taking something away from the visual identity of those games? Could the same be true for Super Mario 64? Grezzo's Zelda remasters work so well because they represent what the original artists wanted and couldn't achieve. Super Mario 64 was always meant to look like Super Mario 64. But as I mentioned at the outset, Mario 64 on Switch was indeed the recipient of a very subtle remaster. This was a game designed to display at a resolution of 240 vertical pixels. Its art and what textures were there had been created for that resolution. Of course, there are obvious things like the HUD, but so much more of Super Mario 64 has been cleaned up than that. You've likely seen this particular comparison from the trailer, but every texture on Mario himself has been replaced with a higher resolution version. Some of this may be done through AI, but other things like the M on his hat have clearly been done manually. When AI boosts the resolution of things, it tends to favor rounded edges. You wouldn't get those pointy tips to the M. That was something that someone had to go in and do on their own. The same can also be said of every billboard in the game. Billboards are 2D elements that are used to represent 3D objects, and Super Mario 64 uses them extensively. Trees, bombs, coins, snowflakes, fire, and countless other elements have been replaced with higher resolution assets. Even the paintings on Peach's castle appear to have a pass of what's likely AI-based enhancement. But why these particular items? Well, because these were an area where, unlike the rest of the art, it was clearly a limitation of the time. Much like the rendering resolution of the game itself, the result is a game that looks far cleaner than the original without most players ever noticing. It looks the way you remember it looking, rather than how it actually looked. For many, this will be seen as too little. You'll say I'm reaching out to justify lazy development, and I get it. But I'll simply say that if you think getting 3 wildly different, classic games running on a new system that has no existing emulators for these platforms is easy, you may lack a basic understanding of the process. I could go on at length about the changes made to Sunshine to allow it to run in widescreen without the visual glitches present in emulated widescreen hacks. I could talk about the impressive remapping of IR-based motion controls in Mario Galaxy to gyro-based ones in the Switch version. I could talk about how audio and text has been re-edited to reflect new control schemes. But instead, all I want to finish with is this. Super Mario 64 looks the way it looks on purpose. To remaster and bring it up to a shining modern standard would be an insult to its original artistic choices. Its artists perfectly combined the beauty of early 3D graphics with the daunting gameplay needs of bringing 2D gamers into a 3D space. What Nintendo has done with this re-release is exactly the remaster I want. One that is respectful to the original game while allowing me to experience that simple beauty in a manner that holds up on a modern display. This is Super Mario 64 the way it is meant to be seen, and for my money, it's perfect. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.